You're listening to the Weekend Sport Podcast with Jason Pine from News Talk ZB. Weekend Sport.
The winner of the Supreme Halberg Award is Zoi Sadowski-Synnott.
Yeah, that was last year. This week, the finalists were revealed for this year's annual Halberg Awards. As always, plenty of debate around who the finalists are and then which of them is more worthy of winning their category than the others. And then the Supreme Award, of course. How do the judges go about their decision-making? Well, prolific sports author and broadcaster Joseph Romanos was a Halberg judge for over 2 decades. He joins us now. Thanks for your time this afternoon, Joseph. In general terms, how did you approach the judging process each year?
Hello to you, Jason. Well, you know, you're comparing apples with oranges straight off, aren't you? So you try very hard not to make it too subjective and to try to bring some sort of personal guidelines to each decision. So the things I was guided by when I was on the panel in the days when we used to meet round a table and discuss things for the day. How many players or competitors play the sport? How many countries compete in it? How worldwide is the sport? What interest did the performance have or raise in New Zealand? How rare is the event? Like an Olympics is only every 4 years, whereas a tennis or golf major or Grand Slam is there's 4 in 1 year, or women there's 5 in 1 year for golf. How rare is the performance itself? You know, has it been done before? Has it been done every year, 10 times a year, and so on? So I sort of use those parameters, and that would give you a rough guide, I think, Jason.
As far as the weighting is concerned, between sports with global appeal and sports of importance to New Zealanders, how did you balance those two different concepts? Yeah,
that was tough. I think you have to, it's the New Zealand Awards. It's not the World Sports Awards. They're the New Zealand Halberg Awards. So you've got to look at somewhat at how they have an impact in New Zealand. I remember in 1995, it was the Rugby World Cup in South Africa, and Jonah Lomu had done incredibly well. I mean, he'd become a global superstar at that tournament, if you recall. Really, really amazing. Maybe the most sensational rugby month of any player in history. Balanced against that, we'd won the America's Cup for the first time that year. And I know I got up there and tried very hard to convince the panel that, you know, this is a New Zealand award and Jonah should not be overlooked. But I lost that vote 13-2. I think Keith Quinn was the only other one who thought the same way as me. So I did feel that the panel was strongly influenced by the huge amount of America's Cup coverage that year. But anyway, that was an interesting decision. And one that was really hard, with the panel wrestled with it, was 1999. Rob Waddell had won the World Single Sculls title, and I think he was unbeaten for the whole year. And Blythe Tate had won the World Individual 3-day eventing title, and he was unbeaten for the year too. And, you know, trying to compare rowing with equestrian, or which is the biggest sport, maybe fractionally rowing, but quite close. And what does it mean to New Zealand? Well, both of them were important in their own ways, and so on. And that was a very split decision as well, Jason.
How did the process work then, Joseph, when you talked about a 13-2, which seems, you know, fairly one-sided, but how did it work when there were 2 blocks of judges who were, you know, pretty even but equally unshakable in their views on certain categories? How did that play out?
God, it was funny. Well, Keith Quinn, who I love being on a panel with, he once suggested we take a vote, and if we didn't like the result, we should have a cup of coffee and vote again. Which sounds ridiculous, but actually that's what we did. And, you know, we had a vote, and then we had a coffee and discussed it, then we went and voted again and got a good decision. I think there was the closest one was earlier on in the 90s. Martin Crowe made 299 against Sri Lanka. It was the New Zealand Test record, and he was involved in that world record stand with Andrew Jones in that match. So that was first time ever for New Zealand cricket, and we've been playing Test cricket for 60 years by then. And he was the Sportsman of the Year, and Philippa Baker won the Sportswoman title for winning a world lightweight women's rowing title. And this is in the quite early days of lightweight rowing at World Champs. So that was a heated debate, and I felt a bit annoyed about that debate because it was 8-7 the vote. And before we'd met that, when we'd come into the room that day, one of the panellists had said she wouldn't be voting for cricket because she didn't like cricket. This was before it came down to the vote at the end. But I just thought, well, that's, that's not coming in with an objective mindset. And then it turned out to be a pivotal vote because it was an 8-7 vote.
And Philippa Baker won that, didn't she? She did. Yeah.
She did. Yeah.
I remember when the All Whites won the Team of the Year and the Supreme Award after their World Cup exploits in 2010, there was a section of the sporting public that wasn't happy because, I guess in their words, they haven't won anything. Is it about more than that, though, when you're selecting the winners?
Yes, it's very much the impact it has in New Zealand. I mean, if you think about that 2010 performance or the 1982 performance, Jason, when they got to the World Cup finals the first time, the All Whites, I mean, it's a worldwide sport, the biggest worldwide sport, and the number of players and countries playing is huge. The interest in New Zealand was immense because there was a chance we could get into a World Cup finals. In 82, it had never been done before, and by 2010, we'd done it once before. So just getting there was a great performance. And then in 2010, I don't think they got beaten, did they? They performed with distinction, and what did they have, 3 draws or something?
That's right.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're talking about New Zealand here, not Brazil. That was a pretty sensational performance at a very elite level of world football. So I would certainly justify that. I mean, just because they didn't win the World Cup doesn't mean they were a team of losers, but they'd done very well to get to the final and then performed way above themselves. I mean, one of the teams they struck there, I think, in the finals was Italy.
Yep.
They performed way above themselves in the finals. So I think that was well justifiable, Jason.
Do you think at any time winner fatigue played a part? And I'm looking at the list of Sportswoman of the Year winners, and Valerie Villi, as she was, who became Valerie Adams again, she won Sportswoman of the Year 7 years in a row. Do you think at some point the judges, and you may have been involved, thought to yourselves, look, we need somebody else here?
Yeah, that was after I pulled off the panel. I pulled off in about 2004. That definitely happened because they gave it to Lydia Ko at a time when she was only about 14 years old and she hadn't won anything major whatsoever. It was ridiculous. She was just an outstanding junior, and they were putting her ahead of a world champion in athletics. So that was ridiculous. I mean, actually, Lydia went on to thoroughly deserve to win that award later, but that year it was stupid. And I know when I was involved, there was the same sort of winner fatigue with Susan Devoy, because she was outstanding for 10 years in squash, and after about 5 or 6 years, you could see the judges looking around desperately trying to find someone else to give it to.
You mentioned before about the 8-7 vote for the Supreme winner. In general terms, though, once you had your category winners, did the Supreme winner feel obvious most of the time?
Well, yeah, a lot of the time, but no, not always. I mean, to win a category like sportsman or sports team or sportswoman, you're very, very good. I mean, sometimes, there's more than one Olympic gold medalist up against each other or world champion. And so they've all got good credentials once they're winning those categories, and to stack them against each other, it's tight. Sometimes it's very close, and I used to get disappointed occasionally on the panel when I felt people from Dunedin might be voting for an Otago person, and I think, well, come on, rise above it a bit, Or there seemed to be a lot of Auckland people on the panel, and they were very influenced by what was going on up there sometimes, I think, where there's more access to television coverage and so on. You've got to try really hard to be to lay it all out and come across dead straight when you're making the vote.
And you've referenced it a couple of times that the judges used to meet physically in person. You'd sit around a table, you'd eyeball one another, you'd nip off for a cup of coffee if that was needed, then come back and make your deliberations around a table in the same physical space. Yeah. I understand that doesn't happen anymore. How much do you think that takes away from the process?
Well, I thought it took away a huge amount, because I know when we turned up on meeting day, what people thought walking into the room isn't the way they voted walking out of the room. You know, it was very important to listen to some wise people who followed a lot of sports. I think what they do these days is they've got a lot of famous sports people on the panel who may be brilliant in their own sport, but maybe don't have the same appreciation for other sports. And so they're going to be coming at it from an angle, and you try very hard not to do that. I remember one year, Ian Ferguson, great canoeist, was on the panel, and so was Mike Stanley, world champion rower, in the Hall of Fame for rowing, in New Zealand Sports Hall of Fame as a rower. And they sat at the end of the head of the table there, and I remember them arguing about whose sport was tougher. And it was like, come on, guys, you know, there's more to it than that. But it was just interesting to listen to it, because that was the angle they were coming at it from. They couldn't help it. That's their whole career right there. And so I think that's why it was important to have a meeting and have opinions going back and forwards across the table, and debates and arguments, and then have a vote, and everyone could see the vote. I just don't... once they went to, all we'll do is send out a list of nominations and you vote, I felt we'd lost a lot.
Can I ask you about the Sportsman and Sportswoman of the Year awards? When you were judging those who were individual athletes, a swimmer, a runner, for example, with those who were parts of teams, was it harder to judge a sportsman or sportswoman nominee or finalist when they were part of a team?
Oh, I think that the outstanding players in a team were not given nearly the credit that they should have got. It's almost impossible. I mean, the example that shines out above everything else for me is Winton Rufer. I mean, if New Zealanders really understood what he was doing, he would have been a sportsman finalist every year for several years, wouldn't he, really? And we've had great All Blacks who have never, ever been nominated in the sportsman category, just to pick All Blacks as an example, but it could be, you know, netball just as easily. They would always... their opportunity would come in the sports team, but it was very, very rare that players in a team got picked out in the individual categories. It was a deficiency, actually, in the voting.
Because I look at the Sportsman of the Year winners in the last little while, in the last decade or so, and there's not a mention at all of Stephen Adams. Here he is playing in one of the most brutal and high-profile sporting competitions in the world, and yet he's never won a Halberg Sportsman of the Year.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Winton Rufer syndrome, isn't it? I mean, he's playing in a global sport, in the hardest competition in the global sport, and doing outstandingly well, and you've got to think he's not winning a world individual medal, so it doesn't count, or it doesn't count to the same extent, and there isn't enough appreciation among the panellists. It's the sort of thing where if you all got in a room together, you might discuss it and go, no, we need to put him in the sportsman finals.
Mm.
Yeah.
And just to finish, anecdotally, I mean, often athletes, in fact, they will almost all say publicly, look, awards don't mean anything to me necessarily. They're not the reason I compete. I'm more interested in performance and things like that. But do you think those who won Halberg Awards, were pleased about the fact that they'd won?
Oh, more than pleased. They were honoured and thrilled and excited. And I've spoken to lots of them who said to me they didn't realise what a big deal it was till their name was called out and they went up there and looked out over a hall full of people and television coverage and the impact it's had on their lives and realised what a huge deal it actually was.
Thanks so much for joining us and being so generous with your time, Joseph. Really appreciate your insight.
Nice to talk to you, Jason.
Nice to talk to you too, Joseph. Joseph Romanos there.
For more from Weekend Sport with Jason Pine, listen live to News Talk ZB weekends from midday or follow the podcast on iHeartRadio.
This week on the Between Two Beers podcast, we're talking to former All White and Halbergs co-founder Tim Brown about his challenging year in business, the realities of being a co-CEO of a billion-dollar company, and all the best stories from his journey from a Wellington flat to worldwide footwear industry leader.
I remember being at dinner in London and people would go around, "Oh, nice to meet you, we're making new friends or whatever. What are you up to?" People would say, "Oh, I'm doing this, and this." And then it'd come to me and I my body language would all wrap up and I'd go real small and I'd squeak out like wool shoes.
Between Two Beers. Listen on iHeartRadio or anywhere you get your podcasts.